Aaron, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. For people who don't know, Aaron is, someone in the Twitter sphere. That's how I know him. And Aaron is a self-described transsexual man and a Substack writer. So someone with a lot of insights into all this gender ideology stuff that's going on right now. So Aaron, how's everything going?
Everything's great. Yeah, going well. Just to clarify there, the Substack part is very new. I started that with the eye to write about rapid onset gender dysphoria, or in general, just the wave of female to male transitioners that's happening. I've got a lot of thoughts in that arena. So that's what it's for. There's 2 pieces on there right now that have nothing to do with that in particular. But yeah, the first is like an overview piece on just gender or LGBT issues, or that conflation. I need to do an overview piece on that, and then I did an AGP piece. Anyway, I'm rambling on about but those are the only 2 pieces that are there right now. So if anybody's going to look at some epic history of Substack writing, not there
right.
There yet.
So yes, so I'm glad you did clarify, because my first question was actually going to be, what made you start this Substack? But yeah, it's new. You just started it in April, so this month. And you've got, like you said, 3 pieces, an intro piece and 2 pieces so far. They're all great. And so tell us about why you decided to start writing in longer form.
I feel like I have some insight, or just some insight into kind of the wave of female to male gender transition, and a lot of just the socio-political factors that are influencing it, that I think a lot of people may not be privy to. And I feel like I can shed some light in there. I grew up evangelical Christian, and I've noticed a lot of overlap between the gender ideology brain space and evangelical or fundamental religious mental processes. There's a lot of overlap there. And when I started getting really kind of aware of that, I was obviously quite alarmed. And but also I am a transgender man, right? So I have insight into that as well. Anyway, I just thought I could put my thoughts together in ways that could be useful to other people who are kind of staring blankly at this and wondering what the hell's going on. I feel like I may be able to shed some light into what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Your pieces are very insightful, and I do want to talk to you about, I'm sorry, my dog just started barking, which pretty much always happens as soon as I turn on record. So tell us about that evangelical observation, because that's really interesting. When did you first start to see that link, or that, I guess, comparison?
Probably about 2 or 3 years ago. The notion, or just there's a lot of verbiage around like holding people accountable, about you kind of want converts in a way that seems really harmful. So growing up in evangelical Christianity, the understanding was you wanted to convert people because you wanted to save their everlasting soul, right? You wanted them to go to heaven and not be damned to hell. So the whole proselytizing made a lot of sense with that framework. But then I noticed that there is a big incentive, it seems, within trans communities to kind of convert other people to also identify as trans. And that, in a way that made it, in a lot of the same kind of, I guess, for lack of better word, but like brain spaces where it's like you have this truth, you want to impart that truth on them, you want to include them in this group that's somehow superior to the rest of the world, that knows more, that has some sort of corner on righteousness. And it just seemed very at odds to, again, I had gender dysphoria all my life, and I transitioned and it went away, and it, well, for the most part, fixed it. And so I was very much pro transitioning for people who were gender dysphoric. I was like, this worked for me, but I wasn't like, it wasn't a case of wanting people to be trans. Like that's the last thing you want for someone. You know, you don't. But anyway, when I got kind of engrossed in the trans communities a couple of years or two, about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, actually. Again, I transitioned about a decade ago, but I kind of got wind of this stuff by meeting other trans people in my local vicinity and kind of getting clued into what was happening online and the different shift in the narrative. And it was really alarming, was this notion of essentially there's some sort of righteousness in being trans and that anybody can identify into it. And you don't need to transition to be trans. You don't need to have gender dysphoria to be trans. It's just something that you can identify into. And at first I was really offended by that because it was really, it is just insulting. Like this is appropriation on a level I can't really articulate. But then I got over that very quickly and started realizing that this is not something I need to be angry at. It's something to be really worried about because there are a lot of young people who are internalizing this message of being trans is good, being trans is cool. It's pure. It's like it's a righteousness pin. And a lot of, I've also realized that a lot of young people are literally transitioning to be trans. Like they want that association. They want to be amongst, it's a club membership. And yeah, anyway, just I started picking up on all these pieces that really, really frightened me. And I felt like I had something I could contribute to kind of shed some light, because a lot of people really don't understand what's going on here. And it's taken, I still, for the most part, don't understand what's going on here, but I feel like I may have a better idea than a lot of others. So
then some, yeah. So, and what was your first kind of foray into speaking about it? You know, did you join Twitter at that time around 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Or did you? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I was pretty tentative about bringing up this issue. I'd been stealth for a long time, and I was really uncomfortable with the direction that the whole trans thing had gone in. And so I wanted to kind of speak against it, but I didn't want it to be so much I didn't want to put myself in it too much. It's hard to kind of explain. I was very tentative about the whole thing at first. And then it was probably about a year and a half ago that I kind of got a little bit more courageous in the whole, in everything to do with it. I don't think I really understood how pervasive it all was until the J.K. Rowling stuff went down, and I realized that mainstream outlets were smearing her as transphobic for the most reasonable statements, and I was like, wow, this has reached proportions that I couldn't have fathomed even 2 years prior. So I was like, taking off the kid gloves. I've got to intervene, because all these transphobia allegations, when people are really just looking out for the well-being of mostly women and girls and children in general, and it just like anyway, it started to look really kind of insidious, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think for a lot of people, the J.K. Rowling moment was really shocking. And I was just thinking today about the part of her long article that she wrote, the Turf Wars article, where she talked about, she said something like, if you could be inside my head when I read a story about violence against a trans woman, you would feel the shock and horror that I feel. And I was just thinking, like, no one ever quotes that part. Like, no one ever talks about that part. It's funny. But yeah, so for you, since you've started talking about, well, actually, I wanted to ask you, why do you think there is that reaction? I mean, I know this is a really big question, but why do you think, if it's not looking out for trans people's best interests, why do you think this reaction is happening?
Because they hate critical analysis. It's anything that sheds a critical, not even, and I don't mean that word critical like in a negative way. I mean anything that is inquisitive in any way, like the Jesse Single treatment, you know, it's like anything that's any sort of like, well, wait a minute, but maybe not quite this. It's immediate attack. It's all forces on that one individual. In that case, be it J.K. Rowling, and she's been the biggest receiver of it. But it's because they don't want. It goes back to the whole religious connotation. It's like you have to believe in this gendered soul, in this declaration of transgender status being like the holy of holies, and you can't criticize it, you can't ask questions about it, you just have to accept it, and essentially just account it as sacrosanct. And anyone that approaches the issue like any other issue under the fucking sun, it is then attacked, is like, you're a bigot, you're a transphobe, you hate us, you want us dead, is like as soon as you ask any modicum of a question, because I think it's based in absolute terror. So many people have built their lives around this house of cards that is absolutely nonsensical. And as soon as anybody starts going, well, wait a second, pull one string and it just collapses, and they can't have that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I don't know if you mind me asking, are you still religious at all?
No.
Okay.
No. It's funny too. I speak about this a lot because I became I guess I became I would have classified myself as agnostic about my early 20s, and then I think about 24 or something I was staunchly an atheist, and I have been ever since. Like I would say, like a Christopher Hitchens level atheist for a long time. But then I completely not completely fell into it, but a few years after transitioning, even before I was aware of quite the extent of the trans ideology, I fell quite into the whole woke sphere. And because I'm still trying to unpack that and figure out how that happened, because so much of it is completely detached from reality. And I prided myself on being so skeptical. And there's another Twitter mutual of mine, Matt. He has got the same exact history, and I just baffled. It's like, how does this? And there's plenty of people as well. But how does this happen? How do you go from being like, you grow up indoctrinated into this zealous religion, and then you realize, no, this is not true, I reject it. And it takes a long time. It takes a lot of brain deprogramming to separate yourself from that. And I keep going back to J.K. Rowling, actually, because when I was a kid, she was vilified in my community for promoting witchcraft. So she was hated for essentially promoting witchcraft. And then growing up, as I became an adult, and I realized, wait, it's all madness. It's actually stupid. It's a story about childhood wizards, and it's just good life lessons that are told in this really fascinating story. And then so it's funny because I remember, like, as an adult, like seeing this is kind of a sidetrack, but just to explain the brain process that is religious indoctrination. As an adult, I remember seeing a mother playing with her son at the park. They had wands, and they were like doing this wand, magic fight, essentially. And I remember thinking, what a terrible parent. She's encouraging. And I was like, wait, no, that's some nonsense that I grew up with, that witchcraft is real and bad and you got to avoid it and you shouldn't play with it. And then so I still, there's a lot of like the woke pro trans stuff that I have to deprogram from my brain as well, I've realized, because when I see people saying, trans women are men, I go, that's so wrong. Like, that's so evil. And I was like, wait, no, that's physical reality. That's, and there's just all these things that have to kind of, that you just find yourself kind of falling into, kind of believing, and then having to deprogram slowly. It's a process. Somebody tweeted today, peak trans isn't a mountain, or isn't a moment. It's a process. It's like, like it's still frequently, just like for many years after no longer being an evangelical Christian, there were things that I had to realize, like, wait, I don't actually believe that. That's a holdover from my upbringing. And I'm still constantly coming into terms with coming face to face with that, with a lot of the I don't know if it's so much trans stuff, because I was never like a believer in the sense that people today, like the the stuff that you see now with like denying biological sex and stuff like I was never on that level, but there were some things where like you did not misgender, like just certain things like that, where it's like these aren't as sacrosanct as I always held them to, or as I previously held them to be. I don't know if that answered your question. I guess it did in a very long
yeah,
way.
no, that's good. It's really interesting to hear this comparison with the religion, the evangelical. It's fascinating. I mean, what is that process like? You know, I wonder, I wasn't raised religious, so I'm very curious about it. But I have a friend who she was raised in actually like a Hasidic Jewish community in New York. So it's very isolated from the larger community. And it is, she describes it as a cult actually, that she had to escape. And that was this intense process for her to like learn about the outside world. And it all started for her when she got internet access and started reading stuff, just random stuff on Wikipedia. But what is that process like? That sort of, you called it deprogramming. Yeah, what is that like?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what she explained. I was homeschooled as well. We were, so it was I was on the kind of the extreme end, I guess, of what we understand to be kind of just American Protestantism. It was on the extreme end of that. It's really destabilizing, obviously, to kind of have to unpack or kind of unlearn everything that you took for granted, everything that you were taught, everything that you everything that you took for granted. And so it is kind of a process. I don't know. It was a long time ago now that because I'm 36 now. So it's been, most of my entire adult life, I haven't been a Christian, but yeah, I've been a staunch atheist for more than a decade of it. But I just remember the whole kind of coming to terms with the fact that that there isn't an afterlife, that there isn't, like that was the hardest, obviously, to deal with. Was to let go of that security blanket, I guess. I think that's the most frightening element of it. And then once you've kind of come to terms with, no, this is the one life that you have, and then it's time to deal with all the little details that built that up, you know, and like what's immoral, what's a sin, what is, you know, like how much of this is based in actual care and empathy for your fellow human beings and fellow creatures, and how much of it is dogmatic nonsense. And so some of it's valuable, you know, but for the most part, it's not. Same thing with the whole gender stuff. Like for a long time, I believed that my brain was male, and that's why I had gender dysphoria. And so I was basically fixing my body to match my brain. My brain was correct, my body was wrong, and that's how I conceptualized it. And that I realized was also a security blanket. The same way, like I made this comparison that essentially a lot of people who are kind of ignorant to trans issues will be like, oh, you don't understand what biological sex is. It's the same way that, for me, that's the same as telling a religious person or a person who believes in an afterlife that they don't know what death is. It's like, you know what those things are, you just feel like you found a loophole. And so I think that there's a lot of overlap with kind of religions that promise an afterlife, and then trans ideology, where it tells you that your gender dysphoria is correct, like your brain telling you that your body is wrong is the truth. You are, like, so in my case, you know, I am male. I was always meant to be male. There's just an error happening with my body that I need to correct, right? So it was really difficult for me to let go of that and go, no, I'm just a female who has gender dysphoria, and this happened to help. But that naturally was actually much easier to deal with than the no, you are mortal, you know, you are going to die and be dead, you know. Like I found, obviously, coming to grips with the fact of biological sex to be much easier to process and deprogram than the concept of essentially immortality, which is what I was raised to believe we had, you know.
That's quite an interesting comparison, that about, it's not that people it's not that people truly believe that biological sex doesn't exist. It's that they think they found a loophole.
Yeah.
I've never heard it stated like that.
I think that was the case for me. was that it's not that I found a loop. It was I knew, obviously I always knew that I was female, but it's like the belief that you aren't quite that, that you're not really that is, or that's not really. It was essentially a loophole. Transition was a loophole. But I think a lot of people who now, with the whole sex is a spectrum, or there are 7 sexes, or whatever the case may be, I think they're actually trying to push that like literally, and that's a different case. I never went down that pathway. It was more like a metaphysical concept, I guess.
Gotcha. Can you hear my
yeah.
dogs? I'm sorry. It's
fine.
so annoying.
I've got a Chewini. When she barks, it's much more annoying. It's very high pitch.
Well, you've also got a cute white cat behind you, I see.
Oh yeah. Nice. I sleep on the ottoman.
Very nice. So, and then how do you conceptualize it now? You said like you're a female with dysphoria.
Yeah.
How would you put that into words, I guess?
That is exactly how I definitely identify. I am a trans man. I am a female who transitioned to live as male. I will never be male. I still have dysphoria. It's way less than it was prior to transitioning. But I guess that's how I'm torn between, like, I don't like the term transsexual male. That's misleading on 2 levels. I think technically I would be a transsexual female, but I think trans man at this point, everybody knows what that means. I accept that I am female. I always will be female. I'm much less uncomfortable with that fact now that I've kind of done the mental deprogramming of, no, I was never supposed to be male. This isn't an error that's occurred. There were things I think that happened in my, not abusive or anything, but I think there were little, I always have been like masculine energy or whatever you want to say. Like as a kid, I always felt like I was a boy. I always felt like I was supposed to be a boy. There were things that happened along the way where I was reprimanded in the opposite direction, that I started to develop a lot of shame around feeling like I was supposed to be a boy. And as I grew up, neither of those things went away. I always assumed I would outgrow it, but I never did. But I think, honestly, a lot of the shame that I experienced, and again, it wasn't intentional. Like I wasn't intentionally shamed, but I was put through multiple conversations from a Sunday school teacher and from my mom on multiple occasions, just like, you are a girl, this is what girls do, this is not what you're supposed to be doing, this is not what you're supposed to be, I don't remember what I'd done or said that got to that point, but I just remember having those conversations and feeling so much shame about it. And so again, that wasn't their intention, but as I grew up, and I just remember that feeling of supposed to be a boy was kind of, the more prevalent feeling was shame about feeling like I was supposed to be a boy. So the shame and the gender dysphoria were always hand in hand all my life. And it only got worse as I got older, and I assumed I would outgrow it. I never did. But yeah, and so it was very easy, where all these stories of like, that of like things that had happened in my, or like just the ways that I was in early life, and then different experiences that happened along the way, that it was very easy for me to conceptualize once I learned about gender ideology and dysphoria and everything. Is like, that's what that is. My brain, like, I was always supposed to be a boy. That was, I was right. Like, my brain is male. And so it's easy. I don't know if it makes sense, but it's easy to get to that point, or at least it was for me. And so then having to kind of unlearn this, like, no, there are early life experiences that really mold a person. And those were the early, that molded me into this really, really constant, pervasive feeling of not supposed to be a girl, and it never went away. But again, like I said, there's a lot of just like when I finally deprogrammed my brain from evangelical Christianity, there's a security in feeling like you're immortal, that you're going to heaven. But once you've actually deprogrammed that, it's very freeing. It's like, you've got this one life. This is all that there really is. There's something very, very freeing and very. I find it much more comfortable than the alternative of believing this is all a test to get to eternity, you know. That's a really pervasive, uncomfortable feeling, but you have to unlearn it, right? And so feeling that my body was wrong and my brain was correct, my brain was male, my body was correct, or my body was incorrect, and I had to fix my body to match my brain. It's like that was a nice fairy tale at the time, but the reality, once I became comfortable with it, is much more comfortable and freeing, is that I am just a female who has gender dysphoria, and presenting and living as a man reduces that dysphoria immensely. Like that's just where I'm at now.
Okay. And do you think that sort of mental shift, did that help alleviate some of the shame that you felt?
You know, I actually got the shame as soon as I came out at about 26, saying this is how I've always felt, and I wasn't ostracized for it. People embraced it. Like that was the ending of the shame. The shame went away when, like, that shame of feeling like I was supposed to be a boy went away when I had verbalized it initially, you know, over a decade ago. So that wasn't an issue anymore at all. It was just the grappling with that narrative of my body's wrong and my brain is correct, and doing away with that was the latest intervention, let's say.
Okay. Yeah. And have you talked to other trans people who, like, have you had these difficult conversations with trans people who still kind of see it in the wrong body, the wrong body for your brain type of thing? Have you had that conversation with them?
Yeah. And like, people, it's so hard to explain, because it depends on when you approached gender ideology. Most people who approached it within the last 5 years are not going to say that it was ever their brain was belonged to the opposite sex. They're just going to be like, oh, it's beautiful to be trans. Like it's a completely different narrative now. So people who, I mean, obviously I talk about this with other gender critical trans people who are on the same page as me entirely, but that's a good question, because I haven't actually, the only other people that I interact with on the trans spectrum who aren't on the gender critical side are like kind of newer, have more like trans as an identity. It's just part of the rainbow kind of thing, and they don't have that kind of clinical approach that I did. So it's a good question, but I don't actually have anybody in my life who's of that clinical perspective and had to unlearn that metaphysical clinical perspective. So that actually has not come up for me. Good question, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that does take me to one of the quotes that I pulled from your article, Ground Control to Major Trans.
Okay.
And one of the really interesting points you made, I kind of wanted to talk about it. You said, a lot of younger people define transgender or trans as simply gender nonconformity, but even that isn't a requirement. Trans is often simply regarded as an identity anyone can claim. It's seen as a sort of moral cause or crusade to destroy, challenge, or queer the gender binary. And these folks are the Qs, often mistaken for the Ts. In large part, they seem to be lonely young people with a need for community. So yeah, can you talk about that point? That's really interesting.
Yeah. That's actually going to be the base. That's essentially the foundation of what I ultimately want to write about in the kind of explosion of trans identification. Is, for the most part, a lot of them don't have gender dysphoria at all, and it's essentially a cause or a crusade. And it's funny, I just went on about how I'm an atheist and had to overcome my religious upbringing. I think a lot of this is filling a void that religion used to fill for us. I think religion actually now has a lot of uses on a psychological and an interpersonal, on a community level. It creates a community and a moral framework that people can attach themselves to others via, and it gives us a sense of purpose and a sense of grounding and community. And I think for most people that's completely gone. It doesn't exist anymore, and we're finding it in a lot of online spaces now. Certainly the last year, obviously, but even the last decade, those kind of real interpersonal, real life community networks have completely crumbled. They don't really exist anymore. And people are turning online to find those things. And so you do have more people who are getting radicalized in different directions because they're finding a moral crusade and a moral cause to align themselves with. And it's dangerous on a lot of levels, but I think the trans one is the most dangerous because it actually involves irreversible bodily modification. Like, and a lot of people might think that I'm an alarmist when I say, and I actually think probably a lot of people watching your show aren't going to think that this is alarmist, is that people are transitioning to prove that they are trans, to demonstrate their inclusion in this movement, in this, in what is essentially a club or a religion, really. Like, if you, that going back to that whole concept of righteous and like the cis and the trans, and like that there's something good to belong to here. It's like, what you said, all these cults that involve like bodily modification and whatnot. It's like, what if that could be blasted through social media to lonely, vulnerable children, oftentimes children, but it's like, I think that's what we're looking at right now, is a lot of lonely, displaced people in need of community, and a lot of them are modifying their bodies to signify that belonging. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of reservations now about treating gender dysphoria in general with physical transition. I certainly have a lot of reservations about people seeking community via physical transition. So yeah, a lot of issues to raise there. But what I was tackling in that piece mainly is that people versed in the trans dialogue understand that there's the trans medicalists, the true scum, as it were, and then who think that it's a medical issue, the whole brain-body mismatch, however you want to explain that, but that you have physical gender dysphoria, you want to alter your body to appear as the opposite sex to relieve that dysphoria. Then there's the others who's like, no, trans is an identification. It's Sasha White and Stella O'Malley did a I think their second episode of Gender: A Wider Lens. I'm not sure if you listened to that at all.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Yeah, their second episode covered this. They do a much better job of explaining like kind of like the ideological difference there. But I think one part that they miss, and I'm quite a few episodes behind on their podcast, but I haven't yet seen them or anyone else dealing with the psychology of transgenderism tackle the issue of intentional identification for the purpose of community, for the purpose of inclusion. I'm sure they see it. They're very clued into these things, but I don't think they've talked about it yet. And that's something that I think a lot of people, especially older people, seem to miss in this. Not older people. I think Sasha's probably a little older than me. I'm not young, but I mean, like, just clued into what the younger, what's being said online, how this is being expressed is very different than I think a lot of like the clinical perspectives actually grasp.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny because, someone was recently saying, someone I interviewed was recently saying how people approach politics these days like it's therapy. Like they're looking for therapy when they should be looking for that elsewhere. Oh, yeah. And we see that happening with like the personal is political or the political is personal, where everything in your life, from how you talk to your friends, who your friends are, like your romantic relationships, like sex, everything in your life is political now. Like what you eat, what what if you do yoga, because that's like appropriation, everything is political. I mean, do you see that too? Like you did earlier mention other woke issues. Like feel free to talk about that as well.
Oh yeah, no, entirely. And that's another thing that has so many parallels to my very Christian upbringing, is like everything is seen through this lens of Christian versus secular, so godly versus secular. And you see the same thing going on. Is like obviously a lot of the people who ascribe who we may designate as woke are not going to identify themselves as such. But there is I don't know what they would say, but like there's this tendency to see the world as either this construct of oppression and oppressor, of appropriator and appropriatee, but it is like this massive religion has engulfed the Western world. It's engulfed our media outlets. It's and nobody seems to recognize that it is very much like you're saying the therapy or politics has replaced therapy. I think politics has replaced religion. Like we've just, because I'm going to see it from a religious lens because that's the framework I grew up in. But that's what I see is I see this tribalism that's so harmful. Like even if you're not even talking about systems of oppression, if you're just talking, say, in the US here, where we've got left and right, red and blue, Republican, Democrat, it's like these don't mean kind of what you are in favor of or opposed to policy wise. It's fundamentally who you are, how you approach the world, how you identify yourself, who you will associate yourself with. It seems like the last 20 years, obviously, it's gotten pretty polarized. I think probably right after 9/11, there was a lot more cohesion, but then there was still the whole Republican Democrat divide that was getting much more stringent than it was in previous decades. But the last 10 years, it's just off the charts. Is like the person who aligns themselves with a different political party is either completely stupid or completely evil, depending on which perspective you hail from. And it's
basket of deplorables.
Yeah. The deplorables. I don't know. It's just I don't see what good it's doing. It's doing a whole lot of harm. That's for sure. But
yeah, it's so true about people not even necessarily evaluating the beliefs or the stances, but just the tribe, like you're saying. We see that over and over again. And the vilifying of the other tribe, of course, because that's what solidifies you as a tribe.
Right. Yeah. Nothing creates an us like a them,
Exactly. Precisely. Yeah. Where do you position yourself politically?
I've always been pretty left wing. I think that's why I fell into kind of the woke sphere for a while without kind of noticing, because it just seemed like, oh, all the other people who are liberal progressives, I'm a liberal progressive, and this is the new thing that we're championing, and so I found myself kind of working in that brain space for a while before I kind of shook myself loose of it, and a lot of it was the trans stuff. Was ever like when like the accusations of transphobia. This is before J.K. Rowling, before things really reached the critical mass. One of the things that kind of woke me out of the just left wing lockstep identification that I thought was the correct. This is what I believe. Was all the accusations of transphobia. And everything was transphobic. And I was like, this is not at all transphobic. Like this is, again, way before Rowling and all that stuff. And I started realizing there's a lot of just hysterical nonsense going on here. And a lot of people are being vilified and demonized for, and also just other things like, a slip of the tongue. Like they're just, excuse me, little things that can get you on the wrong side of the mob, and it just started to seem very, very intolerant, illiberal. Like, so anyway, I do still position myself very much to the left of center, but it's tough because I'm so critical of everybody who's on the kind of pundit side of my side, because I'm like, I feel like you're you're captivated right now, you know, and so it's hard to position really. But yeah, I know what my principles are, and those, every time I take a, you know, one of those dumb political compass tests, I'm always to the bottom left. So I guess I haven't gone anywhere. It's just like my lefty cohort seems to have drifted north into the authoritarian realm, and I didn't. So yeah, I guess that's how I see it.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I know you're not the only one. I mean, I feel that way, and I interview a lot of people who feel that way. Now, to change the subject a little bit, I want to ask you, what is there out there? Is there rhetoric out there that you do consider transphobic?
That's a good question. That word has just been so watered down. Discrimination. I mean, obviously the same thing that we would, again, I don't want to do the transphobia, homophobia conflation, but it's like if somebody is grossed out by the notion of somebody being transgender, if they're going to intentionally discriminate against them, you know, for a job or like because of that status, that is transphobia. Obviously, violence against people, discrimination, like that is transphobia. Saying that a male is not a female is not anywhere near transphobia, and that's what you mostly see being labeled as transphobia, is anybody who just disagrees with gender ideology. It's a transphobe is a blasphemer, is at this point. And so I just have to be very careful as to like I remember when like the whole, you know, like it was just a month or so ago, like the super gay and the super straight, and a lot of people were saying that's transphobic. It's not transphobic at all. But then again, when I saw the super bi, which meant I'll only sleep with people who are either biological males or biological females, I was like, this feels a little wait, is it? You know, like that was one of those ones that I had to be like, no, because if like you're only sexually attracted to full males or full, like that's totally reasonable. That's yeah. But there are certain things where I still have to obviously reevaluate like what I find. Obviously, I'm not going to tell somebody that their sexual orientation is transphobic. Absolutely not. But it was like that was one little thing where I was like, "Is that really transphobic?" No, and I ultimately realized that it wasn't. But stupid stuff like that is what's usually getting the accusations. Whereas I would say, you know, transphobia is discrimination, certainly violence against transgender people. Something that you don't see very often in our neck of the woods. But again, it's hard to say because I've lived and passed as a man for a long time. Like I wasn't, and then when I did come out at my work's a very woke organization, so it wouldn't have ever been a problem. I'm quite lucky in that regard that I've never actually been the victim of actual transphobia. So I feel like I am sort of speaking from a place of privilege, and that like all these people crying for transphobia, they have no idea what real transphobia is. I don't either, actually. So it's hard to, yeah.
Okay, sure. And now you mentioned people get called transphobic for saying males aren't female. So maybe we could talk a little about AGP, because you've written about autogynephilia. Yeah. And I really liked what you said about how you don't think autogynephilia is in and of itself a problem. By the way, if anyone listening doesn't know, that word means a male paraphilia, where you're attracted to the idea of yourself as a woman. And you wrote that it's not, you know, inherently bad. It's just something that some people are. It's just when there's this element of like political or cultural coercion going on where other people are pressured into participating, that's where the problem comes in, right? Yeah, absolutely. And I think most people don't even know that most trans women are autogynephilic males. Obviously, I hope most people know that trans women are biological males. I know that's considered hate speech to say right now, but it's a fundamental reality, and it was not a problem to say that 5 years ago whatsoever. Like that was not controversial whatsoever. It's only become controversial recently. But so autogynephilia is, like you said, a male's kind of attraction to the idea of being a woman, and it is the catalyst for most male to female
sex transition. Very few of them obviously get actual SRS, have genital reconstruction surgery. That rarely happens. But so the issue is on the gender critical, the trans critical side of the house. A lot of them are very anti-autogynephilia. They're very rude and bigoted in the way that they speak about autogynephilia, and I am opposed to that because, to me, it's like any sexual orientation. It's like you can't choose it, you can't unlearn it. It's like that is how they are sexually oriented. It shouldn't be vilified, but they certainly shouldn't be regarded as literal women because they are turned on by the idea of being women. And so most people don't realize that is what most trans women are identigonophilic. And again, I don't want to vilify them in any way, but I want, and I have a lot of autogynephilic, both actual men who live as men who recognize that they have autogynephilia, as well as trans women who are open about the fact that they are autogynephilic. And as such, they don't use the women's bathrooms because it's like, that's not my space. I don't need to be invading women's space for validation of my, my professed identity, right? Like they recognize that boundary. And in that piece, I want to clarify, in that piece, I said that most are not that honest or self-aware. Most believe that they're being aroused by the idea of being women means that they are actual women. It's been brought to my attention that is not true. That's obviously the people that we see, that we know of. But it appears as such, most actual autogynephilics recognize that they are not real women, that they are not trans women. They do not have any intention to transition. They are very privately and often shamefully autogynephilic at home, in private. It's not something that they would present to the world. So that was something that I was kind of missing, or not missing so much as it seemed less relevant. What was relevant to my piece and what I wanted to get across to people is that this is the majority of what we know of as trans women, and it shouldn't be vilified or stigmatized, but they also should not be regarded as actual women because that poses a threat to women and girls in their, in sex specific spaces. But yeah, so I just wanted to put that clarifier out there. Is I think one of the things what's important to me is dismantling the entire narrative of transgender ideology. The whole transgender ID innate, I think it is so incredibly harmful and dangerous. And I want to tell my story tell my perspective to put that to bed, as well as call on autogynephilic men who know what they are, who know what they're experiencing, to be open about what it is that they feel, what it is that they experience, so that mostly autogynephilic boys and teenagers are not going to go down this path of delusion. Autogynephilia has existed in every culture throughout time, forever. It's only this very, very specific one right now where we're telling these people that they're actual women. Like it's brand new. And I think and a lot of teenage boys are being groomed into this perspective as well. And it's setting them up for a world of harm and hurt and disappointment. And it's also setting up a lot of women, especially lesbians, for really just astronomical boundary violations by these men who are insisting that they are lesbians because trans ideology is telling them that they're literal women, that they're literal lesbians. And it seems the vast majority just go, yep, they're real women, let's carry on. And yeah, so yeah. That's what I'm hoping to kind of shed some light and put to rest this ridiculous medieval religion we're living through.
Yeah, and there's this concept now that not only is it transphobic to say that trans women aren't women, but that even talking about autogynephilia is transphobic because they're denying that that's a thing, right?
Yeah. They say that it's a transphobic trope or a turf talking point or whatever it is they want to say, because they would call it gender euphoria. It's very evidently a thing, and And so that's why I keep appealing to the autogynephilic men who are mutuals of mine on Twitter for them to confront this stuff head on. And they're obviously doing what they can, but in some cases quite reluctant to take on gender ideology head on, because they'll be dismissed as transphobic cis men, right? Because they don't identify as women, so they're just transphobic cis men. It's such a minefield. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Have you faced any backlash from anybody on any side?
I mean, I get a lot of crap on Twitter about being, having internalized transphobia and nonsense like that, or being a cis bootlicker and all the kind of just random, trans Twitter activists, saying things like that, but nothing seriously. No.
Okay.
No,
That's good.
not like you. No actual, yeah. Like, that's what I feel like, because of the fact that I am trans and I can wave that card in any tribunal that comes my way about this. So like, I kind of want my work. No, that sounds ridiculous. But like, if it were to become an issue, because again, I work for a rather woke corporation. I won't go into details here, but if this were, I feel like I could somehow use it to my advantage, not to my advantage, but to the publication, the publicity of dismantling just the nonsense trans. Because if I was taken down, a trans person, for speaking about trans issues, that would be absolutely ridiculous. But because, yeah, anyway, so I do feel like I have a get out of jail free card, obviously, and so I have an armor that other people don't have. So I'm not gonna, I may as well not sit silently while I have this get out of jail free card that you didn't have, that plenty of other people haven't had. So it seems a bit cowardly. Kind of saying this to other trans people. It's a bit cowardly to sit idly by while you are watching all this go down, and you have, again, this get out. I don't know if I would have been, vocal about this if I didn't have that safety net that I do have of the personal ID card. So yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
No, nothing bad has happened to me. I don't foresee it happening. But yeah, if it does, again, I've got a get out of jail free card. So.
Yeah, well, if it does also, I'll just apply to our free speech fund at Plebity, which we have exactly for that purpose. So we do have money that we want to give away to people who get fired or suffer other consequences for their speech.
Awesome. Yep.
Yeah. And yeah, it is a fraught conversation. It's brave to speak up when, like you're saying, you have this get out of jail free card, but at the same time, you also have somewhat of a target from the trans community, right? In terms of they might be really angry at you for disagreeing with them.
Yeah. It's very possible. It's very, likely. Mostly all they do is block me. So
that's not too bad. I'm like, go ahead and block me.
Yeah.
It just makes my life more peaceful.
Yeah.
Speaking of Twitter, there was, we'll start to wrap up soon, but I think today, April 29th, Richard Dawkins tweeted an article, and I saw you talking about it on Twitter. So what was your reaction to Richard Dawkins?
Well, he tweeted an article that was very, the article in general was critical of the gender ideology, but it starts out with saying, like, essentially there are male brains and female brains, and sometimes an anatomical female can be born with a male brain. And like, they just say this, they just put that out there, no citation, no anything. And Richard Dawkins tweeted this article.
Yeah.
And so I obviously had a comment on that. But I don't think, Richard Dawkins knows, I think he knows what he's doing. He's not naive. He seemed to be a little bit when I don't think that he was naive when he put out that Rachel Dolezal comparison where he said, some men identify as women, that's okay. This white woman identified as a black, as a black woman, that's not okay. He does something like that and then discuss. And obviously, I don't think he's ignorant enough to not know that wasn't going to come with a shitstorm on its heels, but it did, obviously. And then he basically said, "Oh, I don't want to be associated with any, Republican bigots. Like anybody who's critical of transgenderism is obviously first of all, a Republican is naturally bigoted. Like that's actually a really bigoted thing to say, Richard Dawkins. But but he read, so Helen Joyce, obviously, I'm sure, do you know who Helen Joyce is, right? She wrote the book Trans, like I'm not sure it's trans, and the subtitle is The Intersection of Reality and Ideology, I want to say. Can't wait to read it. Richard Dawkins apparently read it. He praised it. I think it's in the Dust Jacket, his appraisal of it. So he knows what's going on. He's certainly not ignorant to this issue. So when he sent out that article, when he tweeted that article, I don't think that he was just being, like, oh, here's something about gender. Here you go. Like I think, I don't know if, like, one thing I suggested is maybe he's crowdsourcing cultural responses. I don't know what his long game is here, or if it was just a real flippant, just like, oh, interesting, tweeting, not much thought. I don't know, but I was like, interesting. Okay, Richard Dawkins sent out this, tweeted this article on trans issues. This is exciting. So I start reading, and like one paragraph in, it was the whole some females are born with male brains. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory that he's testing or crowdsourcing. That could be. That's very interesting. Because you're right. He blurbed Helen Joyce's book, so he certainly knows a little more than maybe he's letting on. Yep. Yeah. He also read, before he read that, he read Deborah So's The End of Gender. Okay. So he's read a lot about it. Yeah. Next, he'll be reading Abigail Schreier's book, and then then he'll really be transphobic, right? Yeah. Fingers crossed. Yeah, fingers crossed. Exactly. So I've got my fingers mostly crossed for Sam Harris. He needs to get on this bandwagon. What's his current position? Or has he not talked about it? He has not talked about it at all. I think he knows. Well, he had Douglas Murray on, who I find a little bit repugnant, but Douglas Murray was literally transphobic on the episode. Again, maybe it's been about a year since I listened to it, so I may actually have a different take on that assessment. But Douglas Murray was quite crude and rude about the whole trans issue, and Sam Harris laughed along, and that got him a lot of critiques. Didn't bother me much, but so he's aware of the situation, and I really think he's aware of the cult-like issue as well, just because he recently had John McWhorter on, who was basically talking about how how anti-racism is a new religion, and so if Sam Harris can agree with those dots, then there's no way to not make the extension that gendered souls and gender identity and this whole trans ideology is very, very evidently a new religion. And I don't see how he can't see that. I don't know if it's biding his time or not knowing. I tagged him, tagged Dawkins, tagged Helen Joyce, tagged the Making Sense podcast Twitter. I was like, Sam Harris, please have Helen Joyce on, discuss her book, like, because it was right after the American Humanist disavowal of Richard Dawkins. I was like, if American Humanist Association is coming for Richard Dawkins for committing blasphemy, basically, like, come on, people, this has got to be the new atheists, as it were, need to step up and call a spade a spade. And so I was requesting Richard Dawkins to do that because, as I said, Christopher Hitchens would have mopped the floor with gender ideology at least 5 years ago, and somebody needs to. Yeah. Well, hey, Sam Harris, if you're listening, get Aaron on. Oh, I know, no. Sam Harris. Why not? That'd be great. I would be beyond honored, but I really don't have the credentials. Well, you have the insight, But maybe once I write that book. Yeah. Well. Do you have a book in the I do. Like that's actually the original intention of the Substack, was to essentially put my what I've got brewing as an outline essentially into a series of Substack
articles and see if anybody's interested, and then maybe pitching it to a publisher. But that's going to be a long ways down the line. I feel like we are on we're losing time. Like this needs to be nipped, yesterday. And Helen Joyce has already got a book out. Abigail Schreier's already got a book out. Deborah So, any of them, just like, we need, mine will be a long time coming if it comes. So, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what are you thinking about for your next article? What might we expect?
That's going to be I think it's either going to be because I guess I don't know how to approach these things, like kind of separated out, loneliness and religion, the two go very much hand in hand. So it's hard for me to piece out how to approach each one, but that's going to be, that's how I'm going to dive into it, is the loneliness epidemic, how that the primary impact on adolescent girls, and how that immediately feeds into how really just enticing gender ideology is, and trans identification, and then there's the whole sexual objectification, the whole porn element that I didn't have to deal with when I was younger and having gender dysphoria. Like, that wasn't on the radar yet. So that's what I mean. Like, mine's still in a long way coming, but loneliness and the absence of organized communities and morality is, I think, the primary driver in what other people are calling rapid onset gender dysphoria. I think that's a symptom of a much deeper issue.
Okay, wow. Well, I'd love to have you back to talk about that. If you were ever interested, we could talk about, the teenage girls and the social contagion and everything around that. We didn't get to talk about that this time. So yeah, that could be fun.
Okay, yeah, gladly, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate you giving your time and your insights. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, it's been excellent. Thank you much. Thank you for having me.